While Packard was once the preferred ride of kings and presidents, the Final Packards were just a fancier version of low-priced Studebakers. The bug-eyed, fish-nosed, double-finned Packardbaker is today's topic here on Hubcap Club. The 1957 and 58 Packards were a desperate attempt to keep the storied Packard mark alive as Studebaker-Packard teetered on the brink of insolvency. They were developed as cheaply and as quickly as possible, using as many off-the-shelf Studebaker parts as they could, thinly disguised with Packard ornamentation. While historians like Richard Langworth popularized the term Packardbaker in the 80s, if you go back to the original slang used in the 50s and 60s, you'll most often hear these ersatz Packards called Packabakers. In fact, I found this term used in the August 1954 issue of Motor Trend, even before the Studebaker-Packard merger was finalized, and well over 2 years prior to the 1957 Packards appearing on showroom floors. So there you have it. Packardbaker or Packabaker, take your pick. From watching Jeopardy, I think this type of compound word is called a portmanteau. And stop trying to make Spackard happen. You know who you are. Yet, these are high-quality cars, despite being styled and built under dire circumstances. Before we look at them in detail, let's take a brief look at the history of this legendary car company. In the early days of motoring, cars were expensive toys for the wealthy, spawning many luxury marks. But Packard was top of the heap, arguably the most prestigious auto brand in the U.S. Packard's slogan was coined in 1902 by J.W. Packard himself. In response to a potential customer inquiring about the quality of his cars, Mr. Packard replied, "Ask the man who owns one." Packard was respected not only as a luxury brand, but as an engineering powerhouse. Packard introduced its legendary V12-powered twin-six in 1916. Here's a stately 1920 Packard twin-six transformable town car with coachwork by Fleetwood, and an exquisite two-toned Packard twin-six coupe roadster. While many other luxury car builders didn't survive the Great Depression, Packard weathered the storm by adding more affordable medium-priced cars to its lineup starting in 1935. Remember how I mentioned kings and presidents? Well, here's King Farouk of Egypt reviewing his troops while riding in his 1939 Packard 12. And here's FDR's 39 Packard 12 with armor plating and bulletproof glass. This was the final year for 12-cylinder Packards. During World War II, Packard converted to 100% war production, building powerful engines for planes and ships. As the war ended in 1945, Packard was in excellent financial condition. Packards of the late 40s and early 50s were quality cars, but suffered from outdated styling and lack of a modern V8 engine. By 1954, the company was in trouble. Bland cars with underwhelming sales, multiple management missteps, and a high-stakes sales war between GM and Ford left Packard with few options. They made the unwise decision to merge with another struggling independent manufacturer, Studebaker. It was a desperate attempt for survival. Unwise, because Studebaker had been less than honest about its true financial situation, which was even more dire than Packard's. Packard bet everything on its updated 1955 models. The new cars had refreshed styling, brand new powerful V8 engines, and an innovative self-leveling torsion bar suspension. But production delays and poor build quality meant that sales figures fell far short of management's predictions. By the time the facelifted 1956 models were introduced, sales plummeted. Drowning in debt and unable to secure financing to build the all-new Packards and Studebakers that had been planned for 1957, production of automobiles at Packard's Detroit factories ended in June 1956. In August, the decision was made to produce 1957 Packards in Studebaker's South Bend factory. Many SP dealers were still Packard outlets, and they demanded a new midsize car to tide them over until all new Packards could be introduced. Of course, that never happened. The last true Packard had already been built. Because of this late start, Production of 1957 Packards didn't commence until December 17, 1956, and they didn't go on sale until January 24, 1957, months after the competition. I have a copy of the 11 by 14-inch brochure. There's a photo on the cover, probably shot on a crisp late fall day near South Bend with evergreen trees in the background. It's the only photo in the brochure. All the other graphics are illustrations. Even though it's 70 years old, some of the copy reads like it was generated by ChatGPT. The new age of functional elegance, with the new sculpture and action of tomorrow's motoring. As the saying goes, if you can't dazzle them with excellence, baffle them with BS. The finer print gets straight to the point. Studebaker-Packard presents the Packard Clipper for 1957, a new luxury motor car that brings together for the first time the best of two automotive worlds. While some car buyers might crave a little Cadillac glitz in their humble Chevy, nobody wanted more Chevy in their Cadillac. Why in the world would any buyer clamor for more Studebaker in their Packard? Only two models were offered, both labeled as Packard Clippers. Here's the Town Sedan, a reworked Studebaker President Classic four-door sedan, riding on a 120.5-inch wheelbase. Notice that no two-door hardtop or convertible was offered because Studebaker didn't offer these body styles in its full-size lineup for 1957. I guess that's why they decided to build the Packard Clipper Country Sedan, a four-door station wagon based on the Studebaker Broadmoor. This was the first Packard wagon offered since 1950, unless you count third-party hearse and ambulance conversions. It's built on a shorter wheelbase than the sedan. At 204.8 inches of overall length, it was over a foot shorter than a Chrysler Town & Country wagon. The interiors were quite handsome, and this is where the 57 Packard was most obviously upgraded from the Studebaker. All interior surfaces were covered with high-quality Packard materials, the seats were thickly padded, and the dash was a mildly reworked version of the 56 Packard dashboard. Both 57 Clippers were powered with the same McCulloch supercharged 289 cubic inch 275 horsepower V8 used in the Golden Hawk. Using the Hawk's supercharged engine allowed Packard to boast the 57 Clipper had the same horsepower rating as the previous year's version with the larger Packard V8. As you may have noticed, the initial Packardbaker had no fish nose, no bug eyes, no double fins. The styling was reserved and frankly kind of boring. When you view the 57 Studebaker and Packard side by side, you can see more than a slight resemblance. The Packard features a unique egg crate grille and its own two-piece front bumpers with those massive Dagmars. Not only did these provide visual continuity with the 56 models, they actually made the Packard 4 inches longer than the Studebaker, pushing it to 211.8 inches overall. This brought it just a little closer to the length of its medium-priced competition. Moving around the car, the Packard block letters on the hood and that ship's wheel Clipper emblem were scavenged from the 56 parts bin, while the hood ornament was a modified 55-piece. Then there's the chrome, thick eyebrows over the headlights, and shiny ribbed trim extending from stem to stern, which provided a perfect brake line for two-tone paint jobs. Even the sheet metal got a tweak. The rear fenders are possibly the only unique body panels on the car, modified from the Studebaker to include a character crease that drops diagonally from the tail fin before wrapping around the wheel well. In the rear, the Studebaker tail lamps were swapped for the legendary cathedral lens assembly from the 56 Packard. On the sedan, look closely and you'll see weird body-colored caps on the fender tips, a clever low-budget fix to make those large taillights fit the Studebaker's narrower rear end. Speaking of narrow, when you view these cars from behind, you can really see the limitations of being stuck with the 53 Studebaker's body shell. They were several inches narrower than almost anything else in their price class. In my opinion, for what it's worth, 1957 Packards are decidedly more attractive than the Studebakers on which they're based, both inside and out, and also more powerful with the supercharged engine. But was that enough to be successful in the marketplace? especially since the base price of the Packard Town sedan was nearly $700 more than the Studebaker President Classic. If you'd like to see some of the medium-priced cars that were direct competitors with the 57 Packard, here are 3 comparables, all within around $100 of the Packardbakers base price: a Buick, a Mercury, and a Chrysler. I'll let you decide which would have been a better value back in 1957, especially when you consider how much a Packardbaker instantly depreciated as soon as you signed the paperwork and drove it off the lot. Of course, car magazines reviewed the 57 Packards, and you may be interested in what they had to say. It's important to remember that these publications depended on the revenue they received from car advertisements, and it's never wise to bite the hand that feeds you. The most they could muster was faint praise. Current clippers have the tough job of bearing the proud and old Packard name. They definitely aren't cut from the traditional Packard cloth, but they have nothing to be ashamed of. I guess Packard should have made their 1957 slogan, "The car that has nothing to be ashamed of." Now it's finally time to talk about the wild 1958 Packards and the executive who wanted to turn a Studebaker into a Ferrari. During this period, in a desperate attempt to survive its financial crisis, Studebaker-Packard entered into a management agreement with the Curtiss Wright Corporation, headed by a cantankerous industrialist named Roy T. Hurley. So you know how sometimes the boss gets a wildly impractical and expensive idea and won't be talked out of it under any circumstances? Well, Roy Hurley returned from Europe super excited about a Ferrari he saw on his trip. Quite possibly this Ferrari 410 Superfast. With tail fins and fender skirts, it was styled to appeal to American buyers. Hurley ordered designer Duncan McRae to adapt that styling to a Golden Hawk. The result was the Packard Hawk, released October 15, 1957. It featured a fiberglass nose, Dagmars, Packard badging, exterior padded armrest, a real leather interior, a fake hood scoop, gold trim covering the inside coves of the tail fins, and a trunk lid embossed with a fake spare tire similar to the Imperial. Only 588 were built. At $3,995, it was more expensive than the all-new 4-seater Ford Thunderbird. Instead of looking like a sleek Italian supercar, many thought the front end looked like a catfish. Others said it resembled a vacuum cleaner. I love it, despite the fact it's yet another awkward reworking of the classic 53 Studebaker Lowy Coupe. It's a very rare, head-turning touring car, and the only one you'll ever find with padded armrests on the outside of its doors. Packard Hawks are prized collector cars today, even if they're not the most valuable. There's even one convertible out there, a one-off built by the man who was once Studebaker-Packard's chief engineer. That blue beauty sold for over $100K back in 2017. So the Packard Hawk had already introduced the fish nose, but the bug eyes and double fins arrived on January 11, 1958, when the Final Packards went on sale. It's hard to understand why Studebaker-Packard built 1958 models unless it was to fulfill dealer obligations. Studebaker had already made the decision to drop its full-size cars for 1959 and switch all production to the new Lark Compact. Nobody seriously thought Packard was going to survive. Duncan McRae was asked again to conjure up some low-budget sorcery, and out popped the 1958 Packards, no longer called Clippers. The sedan and wagon were joined by a new two-door hardtop model with a stylish greenhouse inspired by the current DeSoto. The 58 Packards were a little lower than the 57s due to downsizing to 14-inch wheels and reworking the crown of the roof to make it a little flatter. Unfortunately, the supercharged engine was dropped from all 58 Packards except for the Hawk. The fiberglass fish nose from the Hawk was repurposed for these cars. Now came the bug eyes. Virtually all American cars were switching to quad headlights in 1958, and Studebaker didn't want to be left behind. But there was no money for a proper redesign of the front end to accommodate 4 headlights. So the designers just added obviously tacked-on pods to Studebaker front fenders to make room for quads. Of course, the Packards got headlight pods as well. The way the headlights stuck out past the edges of the body produced the bug eye effect. In addition, the headlight pods forced the chrome side spare to make an awkward outward jog before completing its journey to the front of the car, while the trim above the spare just abruptly truncates when it reaches the pod. It's hard to understand the thought process that produced this mess. And how to freshen up the tail fins without retooling? Just attach another fin on top of the existing fin. From a distance, it almost looks normal, but up close it just looks insane to me. So many shapes, surfaces, and angles. And what is that decorative doodad behind the fin? It looks like a toy airplane got wedged in there. The distinctive cathedral taillights were retained from the previous year, so that's a plus. I want to make it clear that I don't blame Duncan McRae and his talented team of stylists. They were given an impossible task, and they did the best they could with the time and budget they were allotted. I find it amusing that in this illustration, the Packard sedan looks lower, longer, and wider than a Cadillac, quite a bit different from what it looked like in person. Packard produced 1.6 million automobiles over a lifespan of 59 years, but only 2,822 for its final model year. And only 1,745 of those cars were sold through dealerships. I'm not sure where they dumped the rest. The last Packard rolled off the line on July 16, 1958. It was time to say goodbye to the last great independent manufacturer of luxury cars. The storied mark joined the ranks of all the other independent American makes that died in the 1950s. Kaiser, Frazier, Henry J., Willis, Hudson, Nash, and Crosley. Did I forget any? It wasn't the end the brand deserved, but it's a fascinating piece of history. Since so few Packardbakers were built, I hope car collectors continue to keep the remaining examples on the road and out of junkyards. If you want to learn more about the sad and complicated history of Packard's downfall, I highly recommend James Arthur Ward's book, The Fall of the Packard Motor Car Company. You can read it for free on the Internet Archive, and I'll put a link in the description. One final note. What is the deal with this tiny engraved Packardbaker plaque on the fender of this 58 Stude? Was the original owner named Packard? Or were they a Green Bay fan? Is it just a malapropism? What do you think? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. I read them all, and often I learn something new. And as always, I appreciate your suggestions for future topics. It's going to take a while to get to all of them, but I'll do my best. Until next time, for Hubcap Club, I'm Rob.